In this video, we conclude our discussion on Chapter 3, in which we continue our discussion on markets, where in our last video, we examined markets to determine market equilibrium, whereas in today's video, we now seek to continue our discussion on markets to discuss changes in equilibrium. And we will do so by considering some preliminaries to then have our discussion on changes in equilibrium. Beginning with our preliminaries, we left off last video defining equilibrium in a market as follows. It is the state of the market where there's no excess demand nor excess supply. We're looking at this graphically. We have a product market below, price on the vertical axis, quantity on the horizontal axis, downward sloping market demand curve, and upward sloping market supply curve. The intersection of market supply and market demand is going to generate market equilibrium, giving us the unique price point as well as unique quantity level that is compatible with buyer and seller behavior, such that there's no surplus nor shortage in the market. So then, this leaves us with the question of, once equilibrium has been established in a market, can a market's equilibrium change? The answer is going to be yes, and it's going to be contingent based off of changes in demand as well as changes in supply. We'll recall that a change in demand is a shift in the demand curve due to a non-price determinant of demand changing, and similarly, a change in supply is a shift in supply curve due to a non-price determinant of supply changing. So then what we have then is we'll have our sum of consumers and firms interacting to form a market for a specific good or service. Price and quantity for that good or service will settle at equilibrium, assuming no other changes. Then at some point, a determinant of demand or supply will change such that consumers or firms will respond to the change in demand or supply, to then lead to the market to respond and adjust to that change in demand or supply, such that there is adjustment to a new market equilibrium. So then to demonstrate this, as well as graphically look at a change in equilibrium, let us return to our market for pizza, where we had two consumers and two firms, where we have our product market below, once again, price on the vertical axis, quantity on the horizontal axis. We have our downward sloping market demand curve for our two hungry consumers, and we have our upward sloping market supply curve for our two restaurant locations that the restaurant owner owns. Intersection of market demand and market supply is going to yield us the equilibrium, giving us the unique price point and quantity level corresponding to point A. Before we proceed to these examples though, let us also recall what changes in demand and changes in supply entail. Recall that changes in demand will mean that one of our non-price determinants of demand will change, and depending on how that change occurs, will generate a right or leftward shift in the market demand curve, where this is elaborated in the table given below. Likewise, with changes in supply, given the appropriate change in a non-price determinant of market supply, we will see a right or leftward shift in the market supply curve as labeled in the table below. So then, with all this information together, let us proceed through two examples. In our first example, suppose that our market for pizza is currently in equilibrium. Now suppose that consumer preferences for pizza increases due to an advertising campaign by our restaurant owner. So then what we have then is initially our market is at equilibrium as given on the right, intersection of demand and supply, and this gives us point A, that unique price point and quantity level as stated from before. But then now we have that the restaurant owner ran an advertising campaign such that consumers now believe that the pizza tastes better, and that they derive additional satisfaction from consuming a slice of pizza, such that at the same price point, these consumers are now willing and able to purchase more pizza than they were before. So this generates a rightward shift in market demand, since we have our consumers changing, so it corresponds to market demand, and it's a positive change, so we have a rightward shift in market demand. So we go from market demand to market demand 1 in purple, where market demand is now at point B at the same price point. We're now observed that market supply is at point A though. So what we then have is a shortage exists in the market where the restaurant owner will be selling all of their pizza in their restaurants due to this advertising campaign, but consumers are wanting more pizza due to that additional satisfaction they're receiving. The restaurant owner then responds to this by increasing the price on pizza at both locations, such that with respect to market supply, there will be a change in quantity supplied moving upwards to the right, whereas with respect to our two consumers, there will be a change in quantity demanded such that there will be upward, leftward movement on our market demand curve, and this will occur until the market adjusts at point C, after which this is compatible with buyer and seller behavior, so the market has adjusted to a new equilibrium, which we'll call point C. And this new market equilibrium has a unique price point and quantity level as well, where if we observe compared to our initial equilibrium, both quantity and prices have increased. So then, with this in mind, let us now turn to our second example. Suppose our market for pizza is in equilibrium, then suppose the restaurant faces greater taxes imposed by the government in terms of their operational status. So what we have then is first we have our market that's initially in equilibrium, as given on the right, intersection of market demand and market supply, giving us that unique price point and quantity level as seen with point A. And then now we're supposing that the government is imposing greater taxes on the firm. With more taxes, it becomes more difficult for this firm to operate, that is the restaurant owner with the 2 locations. With it being more costly to operate, that means at the same price point, the restaurant owner will be willing and able to sell fewer pizzas than they could before. So this would then correspond to a leftward shift in market supply since we're dealing with the restaurants. And since this is damaging to the firm, it's going to be a leftward shift in market supply, taking us from market supply to market supply 1 in purple, in which we go to point B on the market supply curve. But in terms of market demand, we'll be at point A. So like was the case with our prior example, here we have that the market is now in a shortage state, in that by decreasing the amount of pizza that's being offered, the restaurant owner is able to sell all the pizza that they have at both locations, but consumers are still wanting more. So the restaurant owner responds by increasing the price of their pizza such that there's going to be a change in quantity supplied corresponding to upward rightward movement along the market supply 1 curve, and there's going to be a change in quantity demanded on our market demand curve upward to the left. And both of these changes are going to occur until buyer and seller behavior is compatible with each other once again, until we arrive to point C, where in this case point C once again is going to be our new equilibrium for the market for pizza slices, where here we observe that with this negative change in market supply, we have a decreased amount of pizza slices being offered and the price point has increased. So then with these 2 examples, what we saw given an initial market that is in an equilibrium state, if market demand changes, then price and quantity will move together in terms of its new equilibrium state, whereas if market supply changes, then price and quantity will move inversely with one another. In that we saw that as market demand shifted to the right, our new equilibrium had a greater price point as well as a greater quantity level, and in terms of our example for market supply, we had a leftward shift in market supply where we saw that price increased but quantity decreased, where we can summarize these results with the table given below, where we have the appropriate change in demand or change in supply, as well as the corresponding right or leftward shift of that curve, and what the effect is on equilibrium. Or if we were to consider the opposite cases from what we did in our graphical illustrations, for the change in demand, if there was a leftward shift, say due to a reduction in consumer income, then what we would see on equilibrium after we went through all the changes would be that quantity would decrease and prices would decrease as well. Whereas we went with the opposite case in terms of a change in supply, a rightward shift, say due to an increase in production technology, that is the improved pizza oven to cook pizzas with. Then after we examine the effect on equilibrium after everything has adjusted, we would expect an increase in quantity but a reduction in the price point. That is that inverse relationship between the 2. And then lastly, something to consider as you're going through these examples and questions when analyzing a change in a market, it is recommended to use the following steps. First, determine the market's initial equilibrium in terms of its price and quantity, from which, after you're presented with the change, determine if that change in the market is a change in demand or a change in supply. That is it affecting consumers or is it affecting firms? From which, then determine if the market demand curve or market supply curve is shifting to the right or to the left. This will then allow you to make the appropriate shift and then determine if the market gets put into a shortage or surplus state. From which, how does the market need to respond in terms of a change in quantity demanded and change in quantity supplied to adjust to that new equilibrium, which will then allow you to find that new equilibrium state, which then gives you the final step in terms of comparison. how does that new equilibrium compare to the old one in terms of has price increased or decreased, and has quantity increased or decreased.